Welcome to the show we call The Countdown. Every Tuesday, 8 p.m. I'm Bill Ritter at Eyewitness News, and thanks for joining us streaming live wherever you are, and especially on ABC7 NY. We are counting down to the midterm elections 3 weeks from tonight, November 6th. And I am recording Facebook Live as I have it right here. I'm going to take it off so we don't get feedback in my own IFB here. I'm discussing all what's happening in the world of politics. We have a lot to talk about tonight. With me in studio here is Eyewitness News political reporter Dave Evans, and from Washington, ABC News Deputy Political Director Mary Alice Parks. Both of you, thanks for joining us tonight, and we hope to have a lively conversation. I want to start with the things that have happened that will fall under the heading of lack of civility, vitriolic behavior. What have we had in New York this week? And last week we had a terrible melee at the Republican Club on the Upper East Side of Manhattan, where an uber right-wing group did battle with an uber left-wing group over an arch-conservative speaker and writer, and it was just ugly. This a day after there was vandalism at the Republican Club, including all sorts of signs and leaflets saying we are not going to end this. And then today, there was, I would call, verbal vitriolic behavior between the President of the United States and one porn star known as Stormy Daniels. The President calling the woman he's accused of having an affair with while his wife was pregnant having a horse face, and Ms. Daniels responding in all sorts of not very nice ways, calling him tiny. David, let me start with you first before I get to Mary Alice, because you covered the club violence.
From Friday night.
Yeah, from Friday night.
The club's on 83rd Street. The violence went from 82nd to 84th Street. It was after the speaker, Gavin McInnes, spoke to the Republican Club. I think police are concerned about that the next 3 weeks. The governor and the mayor, they're concerned about the possibility of future violence. They tried to keep the two crowds apart from each other outside of the Republican Club in those blocks right around 83rd Street.
They've identified some of the people. Right?
They have identified some of them. They're looking for 12 more people. Yep. The thing that still perplexes me is why the Republicans invited Gavin McInnes to speak.
Why did they?
Knowing, well, the chairman of the party,
Ed Cox,
you're right, told me that he thought he was a comedian, a right-wing version of Colbert. He's anything but. He's a right-wing wacko who wants to incite this kind of violence. So
Ed Cox is a well-educated guy. He knows.
He says he wasn't aware of his past. Yeah. Police were concerned that this was going to get out of control. It did when 6 of the Antifa people scooted around one of the blocks and came up the other side and then threw bottles at some of the people from Proud Boys. And from there, we saw the fighting.
Mary Alice, we viewed this a little bit like, sort of a peeing match between skunks, and we didn't really know how to cover it other than the fact that the police were trying to crack down. But we didn't want to give, frankly, a lot of people coverage on this, because this is not exactly the direction the country, a lot of people in the country wanted to go, with just violence everywhere. But you were telling me earlier that this is part of a trend with a lot of violence around the country these days.
Yeah, well, a few things there. You're talking about whether or not to give legitimacy to these groups, and that's exactly what the Republican Party is struggling with and has to come to terms with. Over the last few cycles, we've seen the Republican Party flirt with some of these far-right groups, court them even, and flirt with racist and scare tactics. And we're seeing that continue today. I mean, across the country, not just in New York, but from California to Minnesota to Arizona, we've seen just kind of slash and burn tactics. Oh, I just knocked over a bottle of hairspray. We've seen total slash and burn tactics across the country where these ads are calling Democratic opponents socialists and racist and dangerous for the country. In Minnesota, we have a Democrat Iraq war vet who had his Republican opponent question his patriotism because he expressed support one day for Colin Kaepernick. And that kind of just extreme kind of fear-mongering is something that the Republican Party seems to be leaning towards, not away from.
David, I wonder if the president bears some responsibility in some of this by saying the Democratic Party and the Democrats are just mob rule people.
Well, the governor this week said,
Governor of New York, blamed President Trump directly and said he is trying to fire up support in his base before the midterm elections in 3 weeks, and to try to gin up this kind of excitement, and somehow that supposedly will get Republicans excited about this midterm election so that perhaps it's not as damaging in the House, that Democratic wins are not as big as what perhaps the president fears. But there is some logic to his to his strategy, Mary Alice, don't you think? I mean, he wants to rile up his base and get him going.
Maybe, but switching gears to that other topic you brought up, the back and forth with Stormy Daniels.
Yeah.
I mean, over and over again, we've seen the president downgrade women to nothing more than their physical appearance and insult women based on their physical appearance. And we know that the president is totally underwater with female voters. I mean, the latest ABC News Washington Post poll said that 61% of women say they disapprove of the president compared to 45% of men. And I just can't imagine that calling a woman horseface helps very much there.
Right, and her response, you know, she's not the president, so how do we judge her response?
And her response said, ladies and gentlemen, I show you the president of the United States. And at some point, she kind of has a point that there's a question of moral leadership here. He is the president, and he's using personal attacks on women's appearances. Right,
and then, of course, she went and attacked him, saying he was failure to perform or something, and they called him tiny and all that. But she went low. It's not necessarily, she's not the president, so we expect more from the president of the United States. I just can't imagine a president ever calling a woman who he's accused of having an affair with while his wife was pregnant a horseface. I was wondering when I read that, first thing I thought of was, I wonder what Melania Trump thinks about this tweet.
Yeah, well, she's been out there talking about cyberbullying and talking about cyberbullies hiding behind keyboards. But this is a part of a pattern. Roseanne Barr, Carly Fiorina, Heidi Heitkamp, Megyn Kelly. We've seen the president repeatedly use attacks against women's personal appearances.
He also, David and Mary Alice, used with Melania by his side when he was touring Florida. He attacked a woman, Senator Elizabeth Warren from Massachusetts, and he didn't attack her in quite the same way as he did Stormy Daniels. But I want to turn to the Elizabeth Warren thing as both a political strategy. I'd like to get both your opinions about this. Elizabeth Warren came out, did her DNA test, showed that she was 1 out of 1,024% Indian, American Indian, and Native American. And you know, the response from both Native Americans and from the president were against her. And I was wondering if you guys think, first, before I play the clip about the president's sort of, you know, saying he would donate charity if she did this, and we'll get a response to that. But did she miscalculate by doing this?
Well, I don't understand why she did it. I mean, if you ask most Americans, we probably all have a little tiny bit of Native American in us. So why she did this as if it's going to prove anything, she just played into his hands. I'm not trying to defend the president here for going off on her, calling her a derogatory name, Pocahontas, but why she engaged in this fight with him, I don't really understand.
That's a good question. I'd love to get your take on it, Mary Alice. And as you answer this, think about this. I'm Jewish. There have been times in history, and not that long ago, where if you had 1/100% of Jewish blood in you, you could go to a concentration camp.
You know, this was a point the president made. It was his signature attack line against her. And she's not being very coy about the fact that she's really contemplating a run for president. She's been hiring staff, rolling out different parts of a possible announcement. That video looked like a presidential announcement without just saying that she was running for president. And so those who support her, who I've talked to today, say, look, this was going to be the biggest attack line. She needed to get out in front of it. She took it on head on, and she's showing Democratic primary voters that she's willing to take on the president sort of tit for tat. There were other Democrats, though, that said 22 days before the midterm elections, Elizabeth Warren just made everything about her. Now they're talking about Elizabeth Warren's DNA and not health care or wages or paid family leave and these other issues that Democrats who are fighting in these midterms would rather be talking about.
Let me play the bite we were talking about where President Trump talked at a rally, you know, off the cuff, saying he would pay $1 million, and he had a very specific scenario if she won the Democratic nomination and was at a debate and could prove that with a DNA test that she was part American Indian, that he would give $1 million. Let's see that. And then his response when he was confronted yesterday with the news that she had done the DNA test. Let's look.
I will give you $1 million to your favorite charity, paid for by Trump, if you take the test and it shows you're an Indian, you know. And let's see what she does, right? I have a feeling she will say no.
Do you owe her an apology?
No, I don't.
What about the money that
I owe her. She owes the country an apology. What's the percentage? 1/1000?
I don't have the exact numbers.
Okay, tell me, when you have the percentage, tell me what the percentage is.
What about the money that you told her you would
You mean if she gets the nomination in a debate where I was going to have her tested? I'll only do it if I can test her personally. Okay, that will not be something I enjoy doing either.
And then, of course, he was tweeting about all this, his tweets about it. There they are. So he let you saw Melania Trump, by the way. You can't see it there at Mary Alice, but she was next to him, and she stopped smiling when he started blasting her. Dave, did that backfire on him, or did it rile the base again? Because in fact, she wasn't 1/4 or 1/8 American Indian. She was in fact 1/1000.
Bill, I know Democrats are not going to want to hear this, who might be watching this right now. But if you put the last 24 hours aside, and you look at the bigger issues and the issues that really matter to most voters, I don't think this stuff really matters that much. What does matter is that the president has had great success in the last couple of weeks. The economy, if you put aside the fact that the stock market has some trouble in the last couple of days,
almost rebounded today.
It is booming. Economy is very, very strong. He has two, despite the trouble with Brett Kavanaugh. Supreme Court justices. New trade agreements. He has had a lot of success in the last couple of weeks about issues that really matter. And I was kind of intrigued hearing us all talk about this and the Pocahontas comment and all that, but does it really matter to voters?
Distraction, Mary Alice?
I think that people that like the president and who are inclined to like the president, I totally agree with you. This can't matter. They know who he is. They know his tone. They know his sort of brash responses to folks, and this looks like more of the same. On the other hand, we have seen around the country a uproar in response to this White House, a groundswell of new candidates who are running in a brand new era, bringing new ideas to the table, brand new to politics, who are raising their hand. We're seeing a base on the left that is arguably more energized than it's been in a decade. So we have 22 days to see just who comes out to vote. And I think that in some ways, comments like that from the president reinforce both sides and opinions that people already had about him.
Well, let's segue. Let's use that to segue into the midterms for both of you. And Mary Alice, I'm going to start with you, and then Dave can dig into some of the weeds of these campaigns locally. Where do we stand? There has been, certainly, if you look at the polls of polls, a narrowing of what appeared to be a month ago and 4 weeks ago, a pretty good gap and a pretty well-defined track to taking over and flipping the Congress by the Democrats, and now it's certainly more narrow.
Absolutely. When you look nationwide, Democrats still have a big advantage. But when you put the nationwide map away, which isn't how we elect anything in this country, and you zero in on actual districts and actual swing districts, that big Democratic advantage almost totally disappears. Now, it is remarkable just how many congressional seats are in play. I would say there's probably 60 or 70 congressional districts that are seriously competitive, where I wouldn't be surprised who won one way or another. So if Democrats were to win all of those, they would win the House by a huge majority. But that's not likely. And instead, what's incredible is that all of those seats are really still within the margin of error. Democrats don't seem to have put this to bed at all. And if they win, they most likely will win the House by a very slim margin.
Dave's going to talk a little bit and go into the weeds of the Menendez-Hugen race. But if you could take a national look at that race, the election for U.S. Senator in New Jersey. Last time New Jerseyites elected a U.S. Senator who was Republican was 1972. How important is this? This was not a seat that the Democrats are supposed to have problems with.
Yeah, you're exactly right. That's the point here. The Democrats cannot afford to be playing defense here. They're playing defense across the country everywhere else. You have to remember that there are 10 Democratic senators who are running for re-election in states where President Trump won. That's hard to do and really expensive. And all of a sudden, Democratic PACs are spending money to help boost Menendez. We saw that just today. One of the top Senate leadership PACs spent $3 million on an ad against his opponent. So they're having to spend money on this race that they did not want to have to spend money on.
And Hugen, of course, Dave, today put out a new ad that seemed to take an FBI affidavit and smeared Menendez.
This ad, and I spent between when we finished with the 6 o'clock news till now, reading the affidavit and going over some of these other court documents, and Bob Hugin is just wrong in this ad. I know they don't want to hear that, but I have looked through everything. This is old information. It's from 2015.
And it said that
based on a 2012 anonymous source named Pete Williams, who provided this stuff, which we have all investigated for years and years and years.
This was that.
And when we talk about corroborated, and they like to use that word, that this is a FBI corroborated document, well, some of the things, yes, are corroborated in this affidavit, such as Menendez was in the Dominican Republic with Solomon Melgen, who did get convicted and who did hire lots of prostitutes and bring them in. But just because he's there in the Dominican Republic at the same time, just because there's smoke there doesn't necessarily mean there's fire.
And the ad
this ad is extremely inflammatory and accuses Menendez directly of buying prostitutes in the Dominican Republic.
Underage prostitutes.
Underage. I don't see that in this affidavit. I don't see the connection that is what the FBI is saying. And that is not, and he was never charged with that, and certainly never convicted of anything.
Right, but these ads have been, Mary Alice, very effective. Mr. Hugin has spent millions and millions of dollars on local TV ads in the tri-state area, New Jersey area, on television stations like ours, really attacking Menendez, and they have been successful enough that he is a lot closer than anyone thought he would be.
Right. Across the country, too, we're seeing issues like corruption in Washington or swampy behavior ranking a lot higher in voters' concerns than in a normal year. Normally, things like healthcare, taxes, the economy, immigration are kind of 1, 2, 3, 4. And corruption in Washington is down with like 5, 6, 7. And it's just not the case anymore. Voters across the country are fed up with this town. They think this town is gross. And so any person that can claim their opponent is swampier, is more corrupt, might be able to really take advantage of that frustration that voters are feeling about Washington.
Okay, I want to, our last topic I want to talk about for the midterm forecast is voter suppression. It's not going on, we don't believe, David, so much here in the tri-state, but we have seen a lot of it, Mary Alice, and I know you guys have reported on this, and especially in Georgia, where this is a very big issue. The Republicans have made this issue that President Trump has really pushed a lot, that there were millions of illegal votes in the presidential election. That's why Hillary Clinton got 3 million extra votes more than Donald Trump did. But right now in Georgia, you have the Secretary of State, Brian Kemp, running for governor against a person who would be the first black governor in the history of the country, certainly the first black female governor, I should say. The race is a toss-up right now, and of the 53,000 voter registrants who have been pulled from the file, 70% of them are African American. What's going on there, and how worried should this country be about this?
I think people should be incredibly worried. In this country, we should be trying to encourage people to vote and make it easier to vote. That generally feels like a bipartisan issue. But in this case in particular, in Georgia, what's important to remember is the Republican gubernatorial candidate, Brian Kemp, is essentially one team and the referee in this race. As a Secretary of State there, he's deciding on these voter registrations, and he could decide to let them go through, to roll back some of these very extreme restrictions. Now, he says that's not true. His hands are tied. There's really strict laws in the state, but we're seeing a really unprecedented enforcement of minor ticky-tacky rules to essentially put a pause on new voter registrations. Stacey Abrams has said that he should resign.
Yeah, the ACLU today filing a federal suit to try to prevent some of these people from being thrown off the rolls. Dave, I want to just ask you a quick question about a local race that's gotten a lot of attention here in New Jersey. The New Jersey 11th District, Mikey Sherrill versus Jay Weber, replacing a retiring Republican.
Rodney Frelinghuysen retiring.
Up for grabs. What's it look like?
I think that district right now, if you look at most of the websites that are closely following this, it's leaning ever so slightly Democratic right now. And I think that's partly because of all of these ads that we're seeing. It was fascinating interviewing a lot of voters last week in that district who said that they voted for Trump, and I said, well, who are you going to vote for? And they said, well, I haven't made up my mind. And I'm like, well, what do you like about Mikey Sherrill? And they all across the board said, I like that helicopter pilot ad. They like, she's a former helicopter pilot.
Right. Fighter pilot.
Fighter pilot. And they like that ad. It is very effective. We see that ad all the time. We don't see a lot of Weber ads. The other district that we've been following closely is the 7th, which is Leonard Lance versus Tom Malinowski.
Right.
We're not seeing nearly the kind of ads that we're seeing that we are. Mikey Sherrill is in pretty good shape in that race.
So you had the last word, Mary Alice. What does that tell you? You know, all the issues that we mash our heads about and figure out how to cover things, and questions about abortion and women's right to choose, and Judge Kavanaugh, all these other issues. It boils down to what Dave just said. I like the way she flew that helicopter in the ad.
Well, that was pretty cool. I mean, it was a cool ad. But I think that we're seeing her as emblematic of a trend across the country. Like I was talking about before, voters are craving new ideas. And so those women who are able to say, look, I'm not a politician. I was an expert and a leader in my own field, and we need new ideas in Washington. Exactly. They're finding that that's really effective when they're talking to voters. And I will say something that's very interesting about that race. Mikey Sherrill has had a huge groundswell of support from female activists, all these women who were building grassroots organizations to support her. There's a story about the women behind these female candidates, too.
And we have, of course, a record number of females, 269 females running for office. Well, you gave me the number, and now I forgot it. But it's amazing how many women are running for Congress. There are only 83 Congress people right now who are women. That could definitely change come 3 weeks from today. Mary Alice Parks, thank you for joining us. Will you do it again?
Yes, thank you for having me.
All right, well, you were really great. David, always good to see you. Thank you for doing this. Keep posting your comments on my Facebook page, at least, and I will try to answer all your questions, or at least some of them. Be sure to watch us again every Tuesday night, 8 o'clock, ABC7NY, and streaming live on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, whatever platform you can imagine. We are on it. And, of course, around the clock as well on Eyewitness News, Channel 7, including Eyewitness News tonight at 11 o'clock. And don't forget, vote on November 6th. That's the most important thing. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm Bill Ritter. For all of us here on Eyewitness News and ABC7 NY, have a great night.